She didn't know how to love, but she met a millionaire. He taught her what it means to feel through actions, not words. She resisted, but her heart didn't follow the rules, and she discovered that the right love arrives without warning. Chapter 1. The Roots of Silence. The aroma of fresh coffee invaded every corner of Victoria's Corner, a small establishment hidden among the cobblestone streets of the historic French Quarter in New Orleans, Louisiana. Victoria Clark, at 32, moved with meticulous precision between the tables, serving cups of coffee with a restrained smile, not exaggerated, just enough to keep the customers satisfied. "Good morning, Mr. Edward. The usual drip coffee?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "And one of those cheddar scones that only you know how to make, my dear," replied the grey-haired gentleman, a loyal customer since the opening 5 years ago. Victoria nodded and returned to the counter. There, amidst the imported beans and utensils arranged in perfect symmetry, she found her peace. A small kingdom, but her own. Earned with the sweat of years working in other people's coffee shops, saving every penny, refusing any outside help. Independence was more than a word for Victoria. It was a mantra, a visceral need. As she prepared the order, her thoughts drifted to the conversation she'd had earlier with Mrs. Eleanor, the building's landlady. "My dear, people have already shown up wanting to buy this whole building. They offered a fortune," the elderly woman had said, her eyes gleaming with the possibility of a profit. "But I told them I needed to talk to you first. I know how important this place is to you." Important was an understatement. That coffee shop was all Victoria had. It was her refuge from a world that had taught her cruelty from an early age. Raised in the suburbs of New Orleans, daughter of Marlene Clark, a nightclub dancer who was rarely home long enough to cook a decent meal, Victoria learned to rely only on herself. Her father, a figure, mentioned in rare and bitter whispers, abandoned them when she was still crawling, a ghost whose full name she didn't even know. The bell on the door announced another customer, pulling her from her memories. Victoria looked up and saw a figure who was completely out of place in the rustic ambience of the corner. Tall, with features that revealed both Native American and European ancestry, the man wore simple clothes, linen trousers and a white cotton shirt, but they were clearly tailor-made. His deep brown eyes scanned the room with sincere curiosity, not the condescending air of the wealthy tourists who occasionally showed up to experience the local charm. "Good morning," he greeted, his deep voice carrying a faint New York accent. "Could I have a coffee, the strongest you have?" "Of course." "For here or to go," Victoria replied, not letting the slight irritation she felt show. There were only 2 hours until closing, and she had hoped to get a head start on the monthly accounting. "I'll stay if it's no trouble," he smiled, revealing perfectly aligned teeth. "I have a few hours before my next meeting." Victoria pointed to a table near the window where the morning light created golden patterns on the old wooden floor. The man thanked her with a nod and sat down, taking an ultra-thin laptop from his leather bag. "Anything else besides the coffee?" she asked, already turning away. "Surprise me," he replied, with a smile that seemed to hold a secret. "I trust your judgment." Victoria hesitated for a moment. There was something disconcerting about this man, a familiarity that made no sense. She decided to serve him, along with the black coffee, a slice of her dark chocolate and Brazil nut tart. Her specialty, a recipe she had created during lonely early mornings, experimenting with combinations in the small kitchen of the apartment above the shop. When she returned to the table, the man was absorbed in a video conference, speaking in a low but firm voice about strategic acquisitions and expansion in the southeast. Victoria placed the order silently in front of him and turned to leave when he stopped her with a gentle gesture. "One moment," he said, covering the microphone. "Excuse me, but is this place yours?" "Yes," she answered, with the restrained pride she reserved for those moments. "For 5 years." He nodded, a glint of genuine admiration crossing his gaze. "It's an incredible place. You should be proud, and rightly so." Before she could respond, the metallic voice from the computer demanded his attention again. The man smiled apologetically and returned to his conversation. Victoria went back to the counter, intrigued. She wasn't used to such direct compliments, much less from strangers who seemed so distant from her world. The hours passed. The coffee shop gradually emptied until only the mysterious visitor remained, now working silently on his computer. Victoria began her closing routine, wiping down tables and organizing the kitchen. The New Orleans sky began to darken, heralding the torrential rain so common at that time of year. "I'm closing in 15 minutes, she announced, without looking directly at him. "Of course, my apologies for overstaying," he replied, starting to pack his things. "The tart was phenomenal, by the way. I've never tasted anything like it." A distant thunderclap made the old windows rattle. At the same instant, the lights in the shop flickered once, twice, 3 times, and then went out completely. Victoria sighed. It wasn't the first time this had happened. The electrical system of the colonial building bravely resisted the 21st century, but failures were inevitable, especially during storms. "The circuit breaker is in the basement," she muttered to herself, grabbing a small flashlight she kept under the counter for just these occasions. "Can I help?" the man offered, already on his feet. "I have some experience with electrical systems." Victoria hesitated. Her instinct screamed to refuse any help, especially from a stranger. But the thunder was now closer, and the basement was a damp labyrinth of boxes and old furniture. Against her better judgment, she nodded. "Come with me," she said, heading towards the small door hidden behind a bookshelf. The basement was exactly as she feared, dark, stuffy, and with the characteristic smell of old paper and damp wood. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness as they both navigated between dusty boxes. "My name is Raphael, by the way," he said, breaking the uncomfortable silence. Raphael Sterling. The surname made Victoria stop. Sterling. Even in the isolation of her small world in the French Quarter, she knew that name. One of the largest business families in the United States, owners of a chain of luxury hotels, wineries, and, if the rumors were true, half the real estate market in New York. "Victoria Clark," she replied curtly, trying to hide her surprise. "The breaker box is right over there." Raphael seemed about to say something else when a new, much closer crash shook the structure. A sharp crack preceded the unmistakable sound of splintering wood. "What was that?" Victoria asked, alarmed. "I think it hit the roof structure," Raphael answered, already moving quickly towards the stairs. "We need to check." Racing up the stairs, they reached the coffee shop just in time to see rain pouring into the main room through a hole in the old ceiling. Water streamed down the walls, forming puddles on the wooden floor that Victoria had meticulously waxed that morning. "No," she whispered, despair rising in her throat like a tide. Raphael didn't hesitate. He took off his shirt, revealing a surprisingly athletic physique, and climbed onto a chair to reach the damaged area. "We need to divert the water and cover this hole until the rain lets up," he said, his voice firm. "Do you have a tarp? A bucket?" Victoria snapped out of her stupor and ran to get the requested items. They worked together for the next 30 minutes, strategically placing buckets, improvising a temporary cover with a plastic tarp she used to protect the coffee bean sacks. When they had finally contained the worst of it, they were both soaked and exhausted. Victoria looked around, assessing the damage. The ceiling would need extensive repairs. The wooden floor would certainly warp. The walls, with their recent paint job, were already showing water stains. "How much is all this going to cost?" she wondered aloud, feeling the weight of the bills piling up in her mind. "I can recommend some reliable people," Raphael offered, now sitting on a high stool near the counter. "I work with the restoration of historic properties. It's part of what I came to New Orleans to do." Victoria stared at him, suspicious. "I don't need any favors." "It's not a favor," he replied calmly. "It's networking. You know the best coffee suppliers in the region. I know the best restorers. A fair trade." Something in the way he spoke, direct, without condescension, made Victoria lower her guard, if only slightly. Maybe it was exhaustion, maybe the worry over the impending financial loss, but she accepted the business card he took from his wallet. "Are you really a Sterling?" she finally asked. Raphael smiled, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Technically, but I've spent the last 5 years trying to be just Raphael." Before he could elaborate, his cell phone rang. After a brief conversation, he hung up with a concerned expression. "I have to go," he said, putting on his still damp shirt, "but I'll be back tomorrow to see how things are if you'll let me." Victoria nodded non-committally. As he left into the rainy night, she stood there, the card between her fingers, trying to process the strange encounter. Who was this man, really, who appeared out of nowhere? Talking business on expensive video calls, but knew how to improvise roof repairs. What she didn't know, as she locked up her damaged coffee shop, was that Raphael Sterling held secrets as deep as her own, and that their chance meeting would irrevocably change the course of their lives, long shielded by solitude. Chapter 2. Parallel Worlds. The sun had barely risen when Victoria was already at the coffee shop, assessing the damage from the previous night's storm. Her apartment upstairs had been spared, but the main room had suffered considerably. She looked at the ceiling, haphazardly covered by the tarp, and sighed. This would consume all her savings from the last few months if she was lucky. She picked up her phone, contemplating the number she had reluctantly saved the night before. Raphael Sterling. As much as her pride protested, she needed professional help and fast. Before she could make a decision, she heard a knock on the front door. "We're closed," she shouted, not taking her eyes off the budget she was trying to draft in her worn-out notebook. "I brought reinforcements," a familiar voice replied from the other side. Hesitantly, Victoria unlocked the door. There stood Raphael, impeccably dressed in casual clothes that, despite their simplicity, screamed exclusivity. Behind him, 3 men waited with tools and equipment. "Good morning," he said with a cautious smile. "I hope I'm not intruding, but I thought the sooner we start the repairs, the better." "I haven't even accepted your help yet," Victoria replied, crossing her arms defensively. "It's not help, it's an investment," Raphael countered calmly. "I know potential when I see it. Your coffee shop is a hidden gem in this city. It would be a shame to see it closed because of a weather-related setback." Something in his sincere tone disarmed her, or maybe it was just pragmatism shouting louder than pride. With a resigned sigh, she stepped aside, allowing them to enter. "Master Arthur and his assistants are the best restorers in the French Quarter," Raphael explained, as the men began to examine the damage. "They've been working in historic preservation for 3 generations." While the professionals assessed the structure, Raphael and Victoria sat in the only dry corner of the room. "Why are you doing this?" she asked directly. "People like you usually have ulterior motives." Raphael smiled, a smile that seemed to hold centuries of untold stories. "People like me. Rich, powerful, the ones who think they can buy everything and everyone." "Fair enough," he nodded, surprising her. "But maybe I'm not exactly like people like me. Or maybe you don't know me well enough to judge." Victoria observed him closely. There was something enigmatic about Raphael, a walking contradiction. The imposing surname contrasted with the simplicity of his gestures. His eyes, deep as wells, seemed to carry more stories than his age suggested. "Is your shop closed today?" he asked, changing the subject. "Obviously," Victoria replied, pointing to the chaos around them. "Then allow me to return yesterday's hospitality. I know a place not far from here, perfect for breakfast while we discuss the restoration plan." Against her better judgment, Victoria accepted. She left precise instructions with Master Arthur and followed Raphael outside, under a sky that was surprisingly clear after the night's storm. They walked in silence through the cobblestone streets, passing vibrantly colored colonial townhouses that made the French Quarter one of America's historic jewels. To Victoria's surprise, Raphael didn't take her to a fancy restaurant, but to a small family-run diner where elderly women served grits and beignets with pot-brewed coffee. "I found this place on my first day here," he explained as they sat on wooden stools. "It reminds me of a place I used to eat at when I worked in the Mississippi Delta." "The Mississippi Delta? I thought the Sterlings were from New York." "The company is, yes. Let's just say I have a complicated relationship with the family business." He paused, watching a woman prepare beignets. "I spent the last 5 years away, working on historic preservation in riverside communities in the Delta." "Why?" Victoria asked, genuinely curious. Raphael considered the question for a moment, as if weighing how much of himself to reveal. I got tired of being just a surname, he finally answered. I wanted to build something with my own hands, to see the real impact of my work. There was truth in those words. Victoria could feel it. A truth that unexpectedly resonated with her own story. Breakfast arrived, bowls of creamy grits topped with fresh churned butter, fluffy beignets and strong coffee served in enamel mugs. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, until Raphael spoke again. "And you, how did you end up with a coffee shop? In the French Quarter?" Victoria hesitated. She rarely spoke about herself, about her past. She had built walls so high around her stories that she sometimes forgot what it was like to share them. "I grew up in New Orleans," she began cautiously. "In the suburbs. My mother worked nights, so I spent a lot of time alone. I learned to cook out of necessity, to make coffee to keep her awake when she came home exhausted in the morning." She omitted the details, the different men who appeared in her mother's life and disappeared just as quickly. The late bills, the nights she had only bread and butter for dinner. Some things were too private to share with a near stranger, no matter how intriguing he was. At 16, I started working in coffee shops. I realized I had a knack for it, for the beans, for the recipes. I saved every penny for almost 10 years. When I found that building in the Quarter, abandoned but with so much potential, I knew it was my destiny. Raphael listened attentively, without interrupting, without judging. When she finished, he nodded with respect. "Building something from scratch takes courage," he said, with genuine admiration. "Few people have that kind of strength." "Or that kind of stubbornness," she added, allowing herself a rare smile. Raphael's phone rang, interrupting the moment. He glanced at the device, and his expression changed subtly, an almost imperceptible tension in his shoulders, a fleeting shadow in his eyes. "I need to take this," he apologized, stepping a few feet away. Victoria watched him during the brief conversation. His posture had changed completely, more upright, his voice more controlled, the New York accent more pronounced. When he returned to the table, something of the relaxed Raphael from moments before was gone. "Trouble?" she ventured. "Just family business," he replied vaguely. "I'm back in New York temporarily to sort out some loose ends. My father is stepping down as chairman of the group, and there's a whole restructuring underway." "And you're the natural heir?" "In theory." His gaze wandered to the historic rooftops of the Quarter visible in the distance. "But I spent 5 years building another life, another purpose. Going back now feels like a step backward," she completed, understanding perfectly. "Exactly." They finished their breakfast and returned to Victoria's corner, where the workers had already removed the damaged parts of the ceiling and were preparing the structure for the final repairs. "Master Arthur said they can finish everything in 3 days, Raphael informed her. "They'll use traditional techniques, preserving the original structure." 3 days closed means a lot of lost revenue, Victoria murmured, doing mental calculations. "I have a proposal," Raphael said, after a moment of thought. "The Sterling Hotel is hosting a food festival this weekend, right here in the Quarter. Several chefs from the region have been invited to create experiences with local ingredients." Victoria narrowed her eyes, suspicious. "And?" "One of the participants cancelled at the last minute. We need someone with expertise in gourmet coffee and regional pastries. Are you offering me a job out of pity?" Raphael shook his head patiently. "I'm offering a business opportunity. Your coffee and your creations deserve visibility, and the fee is not insignificant." Victoria crossed her arms, torn. The proposal was tempting. The money would offset the days the shop was closed and bring exposure to her small establishment. But accepting meant entering his world, a world she had always been wary of. "I'll think about it," she finally replied. Raphael nodded, without pressing. "Fair enough. The festival starts tomorrow. I'll leave your name on the guest list in case you decide to show up." Before leaving, he hesitated at the door, as if he wanted to say something more. Instead, he just smiled, that enigmatic smile that seemed to hide oceans, and left. Victoria stood still for a long time, watching the workers, smelling the familiar scent of old wood mixed with the aroma of coffee ingrained in the walls. Her small refuge was in the hands of strangers now, and somehow her life also seemed to be taking an unexpected turn. That night, after the workers had left, she went up to her small apartment above the shop. She opened a bottle of cheap wine she kept for special occasions, or crises as she often joked to herself, and sat by the window overlooking the distant lights of the city. Her phone rang, displaying a name she hadn't seen in years. Mom. Victoria's stomach tightened into a knot. Why now? Why, after almost 3 years of silence, had Marlene Clark decided to reappear in her life? With a slightly trembling finger, Victoria silenced the call. A few seconds later, a text message appeared. "Honey, we need to talk. I'm back in Chester, New Orleans. I have important news." Victoria placed the phone face down as if she could also silence the memories that contact awakened. A strange coincidence, she thought, that just as a Sterling entered her life, her mother reappeared from the shadows. What Victoria couldn't imagine was that these two seemingly disconnected events were more intertwined than anyone could suspect, and that secrets kept for years were about to surface, like bubbles that inevitably rise to the water's surface, no matter how deep they are formed. Chapter 3. Revelations at the Table. The Sterling Hotel in the French Quarter was an impressive structure that blended preserved colonial elements with modern touches of understated luxury. Situated atop a gentle rise, it offered a privileged view of the Mississippi River and the city skyline. Victoria felt out of place as soon as she walked through the entrance, dressed in what she considered her best outfit, a simple navy blue dress and artisanal sandals. After much deliberation, she had decided to accept Raphael's invitation. Pragmatism, she told herself. Just business. It had nothing to do with her curiosity about his world, or the way his smile seemed to transform the atmosphere around him. "Good evening, ma'am. How may I help you?" the receptionist asked with practiced politeness. "I'm Victoria Clark. I was invited to the food festival." The man consulted a list, and his expression changed subtly. "Of course, Ms. Clark. Mr. Sterling left specific instructions. Please follow me." Instead of directing her to the main ballroom, where Victoria could see elegantly decorated tables and people in formal attire, the employee led her down a side corridor to a small private room. "Mr. Raphael asked that you wait here. He will join you shortly to discuss the details of your participation. Alone in The luxurious room, Victoria felt even more uncomfortable. She examined the paintings on the walls, reproductions of famous works by Louisiana artists, mixed with old photographs of the French Quarter. One in particular caught her eye. It showed the building where her coffee shop now stood, decades ago when it apparently housed a small bookstore. "Fascinating how spaces hold stories, isn't it?" Raphael's voice startled her. She hadn't heard him enter. "I did some research on your building," he continued, approaching to look at the photograph. "It was built in the late 19th century by a French merchant. It's been a residence, a bookstore, a dressmaker's studio, and now one of the best coffee shops in Louisiana." "You're exaggerating," Victoria replied, trying to ignore his proximity and the subtle cologne he wore. "It's just a small neighborhood business." "With the potential for so much more," Raphael countered, turning to face her. Something in his gaze was different today, a restrained intensity, as if he were constantly calculating unspoken words. "Let's get straight to the point," Victoria said, uncomfortable with the silence that had settled between them. "What would my role be in this event?" Raphael gestured for them to sit. "Tomorrow is dedicated to the coffee experience. We'll have experts talking about American beans, brewing methods and pairings. Your space would be to demonstrate your talent with pastries that accompany coffee, especially using regional ingredients." "And the payment?" Raphael mentioned a sum that made Victoria's eyes widen involuntarily. It was more than she earned in an entire month at the shop. "That's a lot," she said, hesitating. "It's fair," he corrected. "Quality deserves proper recognition." Before she could reply, the door opened again. An elegant woman, around 50, entered with the confidence of someone accustomed to commanding a room. "Raphael, dear, everyone is asking for you in the—" She stopped short upon noticing Victoria. Her eyes, identical to Raphael's, quickly sized her up. "Oh, I didn't realize you had company." "Mother, this is Victoria Clark, The guest chef for the coffee and regional pastry section tomorrow. Victoria, this is my mother, Isabel Sterling. Isabel extended a hand with perfectly manicured nails, her smile not reaching her eyes. Charmed, Raphael has an excellent eye for obscure talents. The condescending tone did not go unnoticed. Victoria shook the offered hand with deliberate firmness. Perhaps it's because he knows how to look beyond appearances. She replied, holding her gaze steady. A flicker of surprise and something close to respect crossed Isabel's eyes. Raphael seemed to suppress a smile. Raphael, your presence is required in the main ballroom, Isabel continued, turning to her son. Patricia Moreau has arrived, and you know how she gets when she doesn't receive the proper attention. Upon hearing the name, Raphael tensed almost imperceptibly. Victoria noticed the subtle shift in his posture, the tightening of his jaw. Tell her I'll be there in a few minutes, he replied with a formality that didn't match the man she had met at the coffee shop. Isabel cast one last appraising glance at Victoria before leaving, closing the door with studied elegance. Your mother seems interesting, Victoria commented, breaking the uncomfortable silence. Raphael smiled humorlessly. Diplomatic as ever. Isabel Sterling is a force of nature. She built the hotel empire alongside my father and never lets anyone forget it. And who is Patricia Moreau? Victoria asked, surprised by her own boldness. Raphael hesitated, his gaze drifting to the window that showed the lights of the old city. A complicated family connection. She's the daughter of our partners in France. The Moreaus control a large part of the European hotel market. There was more to that story, Victoria could feel it. Something in the way he averted his gaze, how his voice took on a more formal tone. I see, she said, though she didn't fully understand. Well, I should let you get to your social duties. I'll be here tomorrow at 9, as agreed. She stood up, adjusting her simple dress, suddenly aware of its every imperfection compared to the luxurious surroundings. Victoria, Raphael called as she headed for the door. I'd like you to stay for dinner as my guest. Something in the way he said "my" made Victoria's heart beat inexplicably faster. Foolishness, she chided herself. I don't feel exactly dressed for the occasion, she replied, gesturing to her simple attire. You look perfect, he said, with a sincerity that disarmed her. Besides, it would be good for you to meet some of the participants before tomorrow's event. Against her better judgment, Victoria accepted. Soon she found herself being led to the main ballroom, where elegantly decorated tables hosted the southeastern business elite. Raphael guided her gently, introducing her to various chefs and food critics, always highlighting her talent with coffee and regional pastries. To Victoria's surprise, many had already heard of Victoria's Corner. That charming coffee shop in the French Quarter, with the best Brazil nut tart in the southeast, one renowned critic commented, much to her astonishment. At one point, while Raphael was talking with a wine supplier, Victoria took the opportunity to observe the room. That's when she noticed, at a distant table, a stunning woman watching her with poorly disguised interest. Tall, with perfectly styled black hair and wearing an outfit that surely cost more than a year's rent for the coffee shop, she radiated aristocratic confidence. As if sensing Victoria's gaze, the woman smiled and raised her glass in a silent toast before rising gracefully and walking in her direction. So you're Raphael's new protégé, she said in perfect English, only slightly marked by a French accent. I'm Patricia Moreau. Raphael and I are old friends. The way she pronounced friends made it clear there was much more to that story. Victoria Clark, she replied, holding the woman's gaze. And I'm no one's protégé. I'm a guest chef for the festival. Patricia laughed, a melodious sound that drew glances from around the room. Of course, darling, Raphael has always had a keen eye for local talent. Before Victoria could respond to the veiled insult, she felt a presence behind her. Raphael had returned, and his expression upon seeing Patricia was a complex mix of emotions that Victoria couldn't quite decipher. Patricia, he greeted formally, I see you've already met Victoria. We were just introducing ourselves, the Frenchwoman replied, placing a possessive hand on Raphael's arm. "I was just explaining to her how you've always been so attentive to local talent." Raphael gently removed her hand. "Victoria is a talented chef whose work deserves recognition. Nothing more. Nothing less." The way he spoke, defensive yet distant, hurt Victoria in a way she hadn't expected. Of course, she thought, what else could it be? Just business, as she had always told herself. "Excuse me," she said, suddenly feeling suffocated by the atmosphere. "I need to check on a few things for tomorrow." She left quickly, ignoring Raphael's call. She needed air, space to think. What was she doing here? This wasn't her world. It never would be. And Raphael Sterling, with his charm and mysteries, certainly belonged to a universe that would never align with hers. Outside the hotel, the New Orleans night was cool and fragrant with the scent of the nearby river. Victoria took a deep breath, trying to calm the whirlwind of unexpected emotions. She was about to call a cab when her phone vibrated, a message from an unknown number. "Honey, I know you're avoiding me. I need to see you. It's about your father. I found out something important. I'm at St. John's Hospital. Please come." Marlene. Victoria's stomach clenched. Hospital? Was her mother sick? And what revelation could this be about the father she had never known? As she contemplated the message, a new notification appeared. A missed call from Raphael, followed by a message. "I'm sorry about Patricia's behavior. Please don't leave like this. We have a lot to talk about." Victoria looked up at the starry New Orleans sky, feeling torn between two worlds that seemed to be pulling her in opposite directions. On one side, the past she had always tried to leave behind, embodied in her mother's desperate message. On the other, an uncertain and tempting future, represented by Raphael and his unspoken promises. With a sigh, she hailed a cab. Some answers could wait no longer. It was time to confront the past to perhaps free the future. What Victoria didn't know was that her decision that night would trigger a series of revelations that would forever change her understanding of who she truly was, and that the Sterlings were far more entangled in her history than she could ever have imagined. Chapter 4. Invisible Ties. St. John's Hospital exuded that characteristic odor of medical institutions, a mix of antiseptic, reheated coffee, and disinfectant that made Victoria's stomach turn. She had always hated hospitals ever since she was a child and had spent a whole week waiting for her mother to recover from an accident that years later she discovered was the result of domestic violence from her latest boyfriend. She followed the receptionist's directions, walking down corridors lit by fluorescent lights until she reached room 307. She hesitated at the partially open door, her heart beating like a frightened bird against her ribs. 15 years. That's how long she had spent building a life away from the instability that Marlene Clark represented. "Can I help you?" A nurse approached, noticing her hesitation. "I'm here to see Marlene Clark," Victoria replied, her voice firmer than she felt. "Oh, you're her daughter. She mentioned you were coming. Go on in, she's awake." The first sight of her mother after so many years was a shock. Marlene, who had always been an exuberant woman with a magnetic presence even on her worst days, was reduced to a frail figure against the white hospital sheets. Her hair, once black and voluminous, was now thin and grey, framing a face marked not just by time, but by something deeper, the weight of choices and secrets. "Victoria," Marlene whispered, her eyes lighting up at the sight of her daughter. "You came." Victoria remained, at the entrance of the room, unable to get any closer, as if the years of distance had created a physical barrier between them. "What happened? Your message said—" "Cancer," Marlene interrupted, direct as always. "Advanced stage. The doctors say I have a few months." The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. Despite all the resentment, all the nights she had spent alone while her mother worked or went out with different men, the idea of Marlene leaving this world seemed impossible. "Why didn't you contact me sooner?" she asked, finally approaching the bed. Marlene smiled sadly. "Pride? Shame? Both, probably. You've built a beautiful life for yourself, away from the chaos I always represented. I didn't want to ruin that." Victoria sat in the chair beside the bed, looking at Marlene's hands. now thin and marked by prominent veins, so different from the strong hands she remembered from her childhood. "You mentioned my father in the message," she said after a long silence. Marlene closed her eyes briefly, as if gathering strength. "Yes, that's why I needed to see you. There are things you need to know, things I've kept secret for too long." She reached a trembling hand toward the nightstand drawer, pulling out a yellowed envelope. "Here, these are photos, documents of the truth about your father." Victoria took the envelope hesitantly. Her entire life, her father had been just a nebulous figure, mentioned rarely and always evasively by Marlene. "Your father didn't abandon us like I told you," Marlene continued, her voice firmer now, as if each word released a weight she had carried for decades. "I pushed him away. It was the biggest and most selfish decision of my life." With trembling fingers, Victoria opened the envelope. The first photograph showed a young Marlene, stunning in a simple dress, next to a tall man with pronounced indigenous features. There was something familiar about his face, something that made her heart skip a beat. "August Sterling," Marlene said, watching her daughter's reaction. "We met when he came to New Orleans for a social project for his family's company. He was different from the other rich men I'd known. Kind, idealistic, passionate about cultural preservation. We fell in love quickly and intensely." Victoria felt the room spin. Sterling. The same last name as Raphael. The coincidence was too impossible. "When I found out I was pregnant," Marlene continued, "August was ecstatic. He wanted to get married, take me to New York, give our baby his name, but Her voice broke. "I was scared, Victoria. Scared I wouldn't belong in that world, scared of losing you to a powerful family that could push me aside at any moment." "So you lied to him," Victoria concluded, the pieces falling painfully into place. "I told him I had lost the baby, that we needed to go our separate ways. He was devastated, but he respected my decision. He went back to New York and a year later married Isabel. Isabel, Raphael's mother." The reality hit Victoria like an avalanche. If August Sterling was her biological father, and also Raphael's father, then— "Raphael is my half-brother," she whispered, more to herself than to Marlene. "Yes," her mother confirmed, tears now streaming freely down her aged face. "And he doesn't know. No one knows except me. And now you." Victoria stood up abruptly, unable to process everything she had just heard. The last few weeks flashed through her mind like a movie. Her encounters with Raphael, the inexplicable chemistry, the confusing feelings she had started to develop for him. "Why now?" she asked, her voice trembling with contained emotion. "Why tell me this after all these years?" "Because I'm dying," Marlene answered with raw sincerity, "and because I saw the two of you together." "What?" "Last week, I passed by your coffee shop and saw him there talking to you. I'd recognize a Sterling anywhere. He looks just like his father at 30. Marlene paused, breathing with difficulty. "When I heard he was back in Louisiana, I did some research on him. Raphael stayed away from the family business for years, living anonymously. Now he's back because his father is sick. August has a serious heart condition." Victoria felt nauseous. Her biological father, the man she had never known, was also facing a life-or-death battle, just like the mother who had resurfaced from the shadows. And Raphael, who had begun to occupy a space in her thoughts and secretly in her heart, was her brother. "I have to go," she said, moving quickly to the door. "Victoria," Marlene called, her voice suddenly strong. "There's one more thing you need to know." Victoria stopped without turning around. "August tried to find you. Years later, when he heard from a mutual acquaintance that I had a daughter whose age would match our pregnancy, he sought me out. I denied everything, of course, but he never fully believed me. He left a letter for you, in case the truth ever came out." Marlene held out a second envelope, this one sealed, and with Victoria's name written in elegant script. "He left this with me 15 years ago, the last time we saw each other." With trembling hands, Victoria took the envelope. "I need time," she murmured, before quickly leaving the room, ignoring her mother's faint call. In the cab back to the French Quarter, Victoria felt as if she were living a particularly cruel nightmare. Her entire life had been built on lies. Her father's absence, which she had always attributed to abandonment, was actually a deliberate choice by her mother. And now, when she had finally allowed herself to feel something for someone, she discovered that someone was her own brother. The cab stopped in front of Victoria's corner. The tarp covering the damaged roof fluttered slightly in the night breeze, reminding her that this was another problem she had to face. But it seemed so insignificant now in the face of the magnitude of that night's revelations. She went up to her small apartment and for the first time in years poured herself a generous glass of craft bourbon she kept for special occasions. With fingers still trembling, she opened the second envelope. The letter from August Sterling, her biological father. "My dear daughter, for in my heart I know you exist." The words blurred as involuntary tears clouded her vision. The letter was a testament to a father's love, from a man who suspected he had a daughter somewhere, but who had respected the mother's decision even with a broken heart. It spoke of dreams he'd had for her, of how he had imagined her childhood, her teenage years. It mentioned Raphael, your brother, who has your same restless and determined spirit, even without ever having met you. The letter ended with a plea. If this letter ever reaches your hands, know that there is a place for you in the Sterling family, not out of obligation or duty, but out of love, the same love I felt the moment I learned of your existence, and that I have never stopped feeling, even on the long nights when I wondered if you were real. Victoria let the letter fall into her lap, emotionally exhausted. Her phone rang, displaying Raphael's name. She ignored it. A few seconds later, a message. "We need to talk. I'm worried. Can I come over?" How could she face him now? How could she explain that the interest she had started to feel for him was a terrible mistake, a cruel joke of fate? And there was still the festival tomorrow, a professional commitment she couldn't just ignore, not when her coffee shop desperately needed the repairs and the money. Taking a deep breath, she replied, "I'm fine, had to deal with a family. Emergency. See you at the festival tomorrow, as planned." Brief, professional, distant. That's how it had to be from now on. Little did she know that while she was struggling with her revelations, Raphael was facing his own demons. Patricia Moreau was not in New Orleans by chance. After Victoria's abrupt departure from the hotel, the Frenchwoman had revealed the true reason for her presence, an arranged marriage agreement between the Sterling and Moreau families, planned for years to consolidate the two dynasties' hotel empires, an agreement that August Sterling, now gravely ill, insisted his son honor as his last wish. The next morning, as the sun rose over New Orleans, painting the colonial rooftops gold, two tormented hearts prepared for an encounter that would change the course of their lives forever. Victoria, carrying the weight of a newfound truth. Raphael, torn between family duty and the growing feelings for a woman he hadn't known for long, but who, inexplicably, seemed to have always been a part of his soul. Fate, that relentless trickster, was preparing its next move on the complex chessboard of their intertwined lives. Chapter 5. Between Duty and Desire. The food festival at the Sterling Hotel was in full swing when Victoria arrived, carrying a box with her equipment and special ingredients. She had slept for only 2 hours, her swollen eyes precariously concealed with makeup. With every step she took through the luxurious lobby, she felt the weight of August Sterling's letter in her apron pocket. She hadn't been able to leave it at home, as if the paper held some talismanic power of protection. She was directed to the space reserved for her presentation, an elegant booth equipped with everything she would need to demonstrate her coffee creations. As she meticulously arranged her ingredients, she tried not to think about the inevitable encounter with Raphael. How should she act? What should she say? The truth was out of the question, at least for now. She needed to process everything first, to understand what it meant to be a Sterling, to decide if she wanted to be part of that world. "You came." Raphael's voice behind her almost made her drop a bottle of Brazil nut extract. Turning slowly, Victoria faced him for the first time since discovering the truth. Seeing him now, it was impossible not to notice the resemblance to the man in the photograph. The same deep eyes, the same jawline, the same posture that mixed dignity with a certain melancholy. "I'm a professional," she replied, keeping her voice steady. "I honor my commitments." Raphael moved closer. studying her with an intensity that made her stomach churn. Was there some suspicion there? Some unconscious perception of the blood tie they shared? "Is everything all right? You left so abruptly yesterday." "A family emergency," she cut in, unable to elaborate. "Nothing to worry about." Something in her defensive posture must have communicated more than her words, because Raphael stepped back slightly, a shadow of hurt crossing his face. "I see," he said formally. "Well, everything is ready for your presentation. The audience is already arriving. Critics, chefs, food enthusiasts. It's a unique opportunity." "I appreciate the chance," Victoria replied in the same professional tone. "I'll do my best." An uncomfortable silence settled between them. There were so many unspoken words hanging in the air, secrets and truths threatening to overflow at any moment. "Raphael, darling, your presence is requested at the reception." Isabel Sterling's voice broke the silence. The matriarch approached, impeccably dressed in an emerald green suit that highlighted her eyes, the same eyes as Raphael, the same eyes Victoria saw in the mirror every morning. "Miss Clark, I see you've arrived early. Excellent. Punctuality is a rare virtue these days." Victoria nodded politely, feeling herself being analyzed by those piercing eyes. Did Isabel have some premonition? Did she know somehow that the young chef before her carried the same blood as her? "Raphael, Patricia is waiting to discuss the details of tonight's announcement," Isabel continued, placing a possessive hand on her son's arm. "What announcement?" Victoria asked before she could stop herself. An enigmatic smile curved Isabel's perfectly painted lips. "Why, the engagement, of course. Patricia and Raphael will finally make official the commitment our families have been planning for years. It will be the social event of the season." The world seemed to slow down around Victoria. Engagement. Marlene's words echoed in her mind. The agreement between families, the union of empires. "Mother," Raphael's voice was tense, "that's not decided yet." "Your father is waiting in his suite, Raphael," Isabel replied, her sweet tone masking a will of steel. "He wants to discuss the final details before the announcement. You know how important it is for him to see this agreement finalized, considering his health." The mention of August's illness had the desired effect. Raphael visibly stiffened, torn between duty and something else Victoria couldn't quite decipher. "I'll go see him now," he finally conceded, before turning to Victoria. "Good luck with the presentation. I'll try to be there." As soon as they were alone, Isabel turned her full attention to Victoria, examining her as if searching for something specific in her features. "You know, Ms. Clark, I worked very hard to build the Sterling family. I sacrificed personal dreams for the greater good of the name I carry. I would not allow temporary distractions to compromise the future I have so carefully planned." The words, though soft, carried a veiled threat that did not go unnoticed. "I don't know what you're talking about, Mrs. Sterling," Victoria replied, holding her gaze. "I'm only here in a professional capacity." Isabel smiled, a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Of course, and I expect it to stay that way. My son has a destiny to fulfill, responsibilities that go far beyond provincial flings." With those words, the matriarch gracefully walked away, leaving behind a trail of expensive perfume and implicit threats. The morning passed in a blur for Victoria. On autopilot, she gave her presentation, talking about specialty coffees from the South, demonstrating her brewing techniques, serving her creations to a genuinely enthusiastic audience. She received compliments, exchanged contacts with important suppliers, and even saw her name mentioned by a renowned critic who promised to visit Victoria's Corner as soon as it reopened. Under normal circumstances, she would have been ecstatic. Today, every smile was a conscious effort, every word a carefully controlled performance. During a brief break, Victoria escaped to a deserted terrace, desperately needing air and solitude. The view of the French Quarter was breathtaking, the contrast between the deep blue of the river and the vibrant colors of the colonial houses, the centuries-old churches dotting the skyline. For a moment, she allowed herself to just exist, breathing in the humid air, trying not to think about the turmoil her life had become. It's breathtaking, isn't it? The voice behind her didn't belong to Raphael, as she expected, but to an older man. Turning, Victoria found herself face to face with an aged version of the man from the photograph, his hair now completely grey, his once strong body now more fragile, but the same penetrating eyes she had seen in the picture. The same eyes that were now watching her with a disconcerting intensity. "August Sterling," he introduced himself, extending a hand that trembled slightly. "Owner of this establishment and, from what I've heard, a great admirer of your work." Victoria felt her throat tighten. Her father. The man whose existence she had been unaware of for 30 years, whose written words she carried in her pocket, was now standing before her, oblivious to the bond that united them. "Victoria Clark," she replied, shaking his hand. It was warm, dry, and conveyed a strength that contradicted his frail appearance. "I appreciate the opportunity to participate in the festival. The pleasure is mine. My son Raphael speaks very highly of your coffee shop. He said he found something special there." There was something in the way he studied her, a curiosity mixed with something akin to nostalgia, that made Victoria wonder if he truly suspected nothing. "Your son is very kind," she answered cautiously. "Raphael has always had a keen eye for authenticity," August continued, leaning on the balustrade to admire the view. "A rare quality these days, especially in our social circle." He paused, seeming to organize complex thoughts. "Miss Clark, Victoria, forgive my indiscretion, but I knew your mother many years ago." Victoria's heart almost stopped. "My mother? Marlene Clark, an extraordinary woman. We met briefly in New Orleans when I was working on a social project in the 90s. August smiled melancholically. "We had a special connection." "She never told me about it," Victoria replied, technically not lying. "I'm not surprised. Our worlds were very different." August paused, watching her with renewed intensity. "You have her same strength in your eyes, and you also have—" Whatever he was about to say was interrupted by the arrival of Patricia Moreau, who glided onto the terrace like a vision in red. "Dearest father-in-law," she purred, kissing August's cheeks. "The guests are asking for you. The time for the announcement is approaching." Her calculating eyes landed on Victoria. "Ah, the little coffee chef. Your presentation was quaint. How nice that you're enjoying your brief visit to our world." The emphasis on brief was not lost. Victoria kept her face impassive, refusing to show the impact of the words. "Mr. Sterling, Miss Moreau, if you'll excuse me," she said, preparing to leave. "One moment," August requested, holding her arm. With surprising firmness, his eyes met hers with a disturbing intensity. "I would very much like to visit your coffee shop when it reopens. I have a particular interest in authentic regional cuisine." Something in the way he said "particular interest" made Victoria wonder again if August suspected something. If, perhaps, the resemblance between her and Raphael, between her and the Sterlings themselves, was more obvious than she had imagined. "You'd be most welcome," she replied, surprising herself with the sincerity of her statement. Leaving the terrace, Victoria decided it was time to go. Her presentation was done, the agreed upon. Payment would be deposited into her account, and every additional minute in that environment only increased the risk of the truth exploding prematurely. As she gathered her belongings, she felt a familiar presence behind her. Raphael. "Leaving already?" he asked, his voice betraying a poorly concealed disappointment. "My part is done," she replied without turning. "And you have important engagements tonight." "About that?" Raphael ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Victoria had already identified as a sign of his nervousness. "It's not what it seems." "You don't have to explain anything to me," she cut in, finally facing him. "We're just professional acquaintances." The hurt in his eyes was like a stab wound. "Is that what we are to you, after everything we've shared?" "What have we shared?" Victoria wanted to scream. "The same blood? A father neither of us ever truly knew." Instead, she took a deep breath. "Raphael, you have a life, responsibilities, commitments that I could never fully understand. And I have my world, my coffee shop, my hard-won independence. We belong to different universes. Is that what you think? He asked, moving dangerously close. That I can't understand your world? That I don't deeply admire your strength, your authenticity? I spent 5 years running from my universe, Victoria, precisely because I was searching for something real. The intensity in his voice made something vibrate within her, something dangerous, now forbidden. Before she could answer, a voice called out, "Raphael, everyone is waiting. Your father is eager to make the announcement." Isabel Sterling had returned, accompanied by Patricia, who wore a triumphant smile. Raphael closed his eyes briefly, as if gathering his strength. "I have to go," he said quietly. "But this conversation isn't over. Please, stay for the event tonight. There are things I need to say, decisions I need to make." As he walked away, reluctantly following his mother and fiancé, Victoria felt something break inside her. How could she stay there, watching the man she had discovered was her brother announce his engagement to another woman? How could she confront the confusing feelings she held for him, knowing they were impossible, forbidden by their very nature? With one last look at the space where she had given her presentation, Victoria Clark picked up her things and headed for the exit. She needed distance, time to think, to process the avalanche of revelations from the past 24 hours. What she didn't expect was to find near the back exit a visibly frail Marlene Clark, leaning on a cane, but with her eyes shining with determination. "Honey," she called, her voice weak but resolute. "We need to talk. The whole truth needs to be told. Tonight." Chapter 6. The truth revealed. "Mom, what are you doing here?" Victoria looked at Marlene in alarm, her pale face betraying the effort it had taken to get there. "You should be in the hospital." "Some secrets can't wait any longer," Marlene replied, breathing with difficulty. "And this one has waited far too long." Victoria noticed a few people starting to look curiously in their direction. She quickly led her mother to a small side garden, away from the main flow of the hotel. "How did you get here?" she asked, helping Marlene sit on a stone bench. "A cab. It wasn't hard to find out where the event was. The Sterlings have always been in the news." Marlene paused, gathering her strength. "I saw you leaving. I had to stop you before you left." "Why? I already know that Raphael is my brother," Victoria whispered, checking to see if anyone was nearby. "I've read August's letter. What else is there to know?" A sad smile formed on Marlene's dry lips. "The truth is never simple, honey. There's more, much more you need to know. And not just you." Something in the way Marlene spoke sent a chill down Victoria's spine. "What do you mean?" Before Marlene could answer, a male voice sounded behind them. "Marlene Clark. After all these years?" August Sterling stood a few feet away, leaning on an elegant cane, his face a mask of conflicting emotions, surprise, confusion, perhaps even a spark of hope. "August," Marlene replied, her voice suddenly firmer. "I was hoping to find you." "You know each other?" Victoria asked, feigning ignorance, still processing the shock of seeing them together for the first time in her life. "For a long time," August replied, approaching slowly. His eyes, so much like Victoria's, shifted between mother and daughter, as if searching for connections, for confirmation of old suspicions. "Your mother and I had a brief but significant relationship. That ended when I found out I was pregnant," Marlene completed directly. The statement hung in the air like a bomb about to detonate. August froze, his eyes fixed on Marlene, then slowly turning to Victoria. Understanding dawned on his face gradually, shock, confusion, and finally, a kind of painful recognition. "You," he began, his voice failing. "You are—" "His daughter," Marlene confirmed. "The daughter I told him I lost during the pregnancy." Victoria felt the world spin around her. Until now, the connection to the Sterlings was just an abstract truth, words in a letter, an old photograph. Now, confronted with the physical reality of her father, with the recognition stamped on his aged face, the truth took on an overwhelming weight. All these years, August murmured, his voice trembling with emotion. I suspected. I hoped. That letter I left with you, Marlene. I gave it to her last night, Marlene replied. When I got my diagnosis, I realized I couldn't leave this world carrying that secret. August took a hesitant step toward Victoria, as if afraid she might disappear if he got too close. My daughter, he said, his voice thick with emotion. All these lost years. Victoria remained motionless, unable to fully process the whirlwind of emotions. Part of her wanted to run away from this man who was biologically her father but emotionally a stranger. Another part longed to fill the void that had always existed in her heart, the space reserved for a father she had never known. There's more, Marlene intervened, her voice now urgent. She turned to Victoria. Honey, when I told you Raphael was your brother, I didn't tell you the whole truth. What do you mean? Victoria asked, a new fear growing in her chest. Raphael is not August's biological son, Marlene revealed, the words rushing out as if she feared losing her courage. He's August's nephew, adopted as a baby after the tragedy that took his younger brother and his wife. The revelation hit Victoria like a lightning bolt. I don't understand. It's true, August confirmed, looking at Marlene with astonishment. How did you know that? It was kept secret from the press, from society. Only the immediate family knows. I have my sources, Marlene replied vaguely. People who worked for your family for years. So Raphael isn't... Victoria couldn't finish the sentence, the implications of the revelation beginning to form in her mind. He isn't my brother? Not by blood, August confirmed, but I raised him as my son since he was a few months old. He is a Sterling in everything but DNA. Victoria felt a wave of relief so intense it almost made her dizzy. The feelings she had been developing for Raphael, which she had considered so wrong, so impossible just hours before, were suddenly no longer forbidden. There was no blood tie between them. Why didn't you tell me this yesterday? She asked Marlene, her voice betraying her confusion. A sad smile formed on Marlene's pale lips. Because I needed you to come here. I needed to force this meeting, this revelation. August deserved to know he has a daughter, and you deserve to know your father. And now? Victoria asked, looking from one to the other. What happens now? Before anyone could answer, a new voice joined the conversation. Dad, I was looking for you. Everyone is... Raphael stopped short as he saw the trio, his gaze first on Victoria, then Marlene, and finally returning to August's troubled face. What's going on here? The silence that followed was heavy. Victoria looked at August, then at Marlene, waiting for one of them to take the lead in explaining. When no one did, she took a deep breath and stepped forward. Raphael, this is my mother, Marlene Clark, she began, her voice trembling slightly, and apparently your father and she have a history together. Raphael frowned, confused. I don't understand. Son, August's voice was laden with emotion. There are things about our family I never fully told you, secrets I believed were protecting us all, but which may have only created more pain. He paused, looking at Victoria with tear-filled eyes. Victoria is my biological daughter, a daughter whose existence I was unaware of for 30 years. The shock on Raphael's face was evident. His eyes darted between August and Victoria, searching for and finding the resemblances that now seemed so obvious. Your daughter, he repeated, his voice low. But how is that possible? Why did we never know about her? Because I hid the truth, Marlene interjected. I hid the pregnancy. I lied and said I'd lost the baby. I raised Victoria alone, letting her believe her father had abandoned her. Why? Raphael's question was filled with genuine confusion. Fear, Marlene answered simply. Fear of losing her to a powerful family that could easily take her from me. Fear of not belonging in the world of the Sterlings. Fear of seeing her grow up in an environment I didn't understand or control. Raphael turned to Victoria, his eyes seeking confirmation. So you're... Apparently I'm a Sterling, she completed, with a shaky smile. Though I'm still trying to figure out what that means. Raphael processed the information slowly, his face revealing the turmoil of emotions he felt. Finally, he turned to August. "And what about me, Dad?" he asked, his voice suddenly very calm. "Are there more secrets I should know?" August closed his eyes briefly as if for strength. "Yes, son. As you've always known, you are not my biological son. I adopted you when you were a baby, after the tragedy with your uncle Fernando and his wife." "I always knew that," Raphael confirmed. "What I never understood was why you always pushed me so hard to follow in your footsteps, to take over the business, to marry according to your expectations." A heavy silence followed the question. August seemed to struggle with unspoken words, with truths too painful to reveal. "Because I swore to my brother," he finally answered. "On his hospital bed before he passed, he made me promise I would raise you not just as my son, but as a true Sterling, that you would inherit not only the name but everything it represents, the responsibility, the legacy, the duty to tradition." Raphael took a step back as if the words had physically struck him. "So all those years of pressure, all the expectations, the arranged marriage with Patricia, all of it was to fulfill a promise to a man I never even met." "Raphael," August's voice was pleading, "you don't understand. I have loved you as a son from the very first moment. Every decision I made was with your well-being, your future in mind." "My future or the future of the Sterling name?" Raphael retorted, bitterness evident in his voice. "For years I tried to be the son you wanted, Dad. When I finally had the courage to follow my own path, to live on my own terms, it was as if I had committed an unforgivable betrayal." Victoria watched the exchange between the adoptive father and son with a heavy heart. So many secrets, so many truths hidden for decades, now emerging in a torrent of raw emotion. "And now," Raphael finally asked, "what changes with these revelations? Am I less your son because you found a biological daughter? Will Victoria now inherit everything that was always meant for me?" "It's nothing like that," Victoria interrupted, stepping forward. "I never wanted anything from the Sterlings. I didn't even know about this connection until yesterday. Everything I've built myself, and that's how I intend to continue." "The issue isn't inheritance or money," August added sadly. "The issue is 30 years of absence in my daughter's life, 30 years I can never get back." A heavy silence fell over the group. In the distance, the music and lively chatter of the festival continued, oblivious to the drama unfolding in the secluded garden. "I have to go," Marlene said suddenly, her voice weak. "The effort was too much. I need to get back to the hospital." As if to emphasize her words, she swayed slightly. Raphael instinctively moved forward to support her. "One moment," August said, his voice regaining some of its former authority. "Before we part ways again, we need to decide how to proceed. This revelation affects all of us deeply." "I agree," Raphael said, after a moment of reflection. "But not here, not like this. We need time, privacy." The engagement announcement. August remembered. "Everyone is waiting." "There will be no announcement," Raphael declared with surprising firmness. "I cannot, in good conscience, commit to an arranged marriage after everything we've just discovered. I need time to process these revelations, to understand who I really am and what I really want." The look he gave Victoria held a silent promise, an unasked question that made her heart race. "I agree," August said, after a moment's hesitation. "Some traditions may need to be reconsidered in light of new truths." Victoria felt the weight of the last few days slowly begin to lift. There were still many questions, many adjustments to be made, many difficult conversations ahead. But the truth, however painful, was finally coming to light. "I suggest we meet tomorrow," Raphael proposed, "at Victoria's corner. Neutral ground, away from the prying eyes of society and the pressure of expectations." "Acceptable," August agreed, before turning to Marlene. "Would you allow my personal physician to examine you? I have the best oncology specialists at my disposal." The gesture, simple but profoundly significant, brought tears to Marlene's eyes. "That would be very kind," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. As Raphael helped Marlene walk towards the hotel entrance, Victoria stayed behind with August. Father and daughter separated by decades of secrets, finally united by the truth. "I mourned your loss every day," August said, breaking the silence. "The son or daughter I thought I lost before they were even born. And I grew up believing my father had abandoned me," Victoria replied, her voice low. "That he didn't want me, that he didn't even care to know me." "Can we recover the lost time?" August asked, extending a hesitant hand toward her, not daring to touch her. Victoria looked at that hand, aged, marked by decades of work and experiences they had never shared. Slowly, she reached out and took it with her own. "I don't know if we can recover what was lost," she answered honestly. "But maybe we can build something new, something true this time." August's smile lit up his tired face, revealing to the returning Raphael how Victoria must have looked to the young August decades ago. "Ready to face the situation in there?" Victoria asked Raphael, nodding toward the main ballroom. "After what we just found out," he replied, with a smile that promised much more than it said. "Facing Patricia, Moreau and my mother seems almost easy." The three of them walked together towards the hotel, each carrying the weight of newly discovered truths, but also the lightness that only honesty can bring. The path ahead would be complex, full of adjustments and discoveries, but for the first time in 3 decades, they would walk it together, as the family they were always meant to be. Chapter 7. New Beginnings. 3 months later, Victoria's corner was almost unrecognizable. The ceiling, completely restored, now featured original 19th century beams, carefully preserved and treated. The walls boasted a soft terracotta hue that enhanced the natural light pouring in through enlarged windows. The old wooden floor gleamed with a new finish that preserved its historical marks, each groove telling a part of the century-old building's journey. But the biggest transformation wasn't physical. The small New Orleans coffee shop, once frequented mainly by locals and occasional tourists, now ranked among the most acclaimed culinary destinations in the Southeast. A feature in the country's leading food magazine had highlighted Victoria's unique creations, her authentic approach to regional ingredients, and the welcoming atmosphere that made every visit a memorable experience. It was a particularly busy Saturday afternoon when Victoria finally managed to take a break from the constant flow of customers. She sat at a table in the back, where a small area had been transformed into an indoor garden with native plants and a gently murmuring fountain. "Tired?" The familiar voice made Victoria smile before she even looked up. Raphael stood before her, holding 2 cups of freshly brewed coffee. Over the past few months, he had become a constant presence at the shop, initially as a curious observer, then as a friend, a confidant, and finally, something more not yet fully defined, but deeply significant. "Just catching my breath," she replied, accepting the offered cup. "I never thought I'd one day have to turn down reservations for lack of space." "You should consider expanding," Raphael suggested, sitting beside her. "I heard the property next door is for sale." Victoria smiled, recognizing the hint. For the past few weeks, Raphael had been subtly suggesting ideas to grow the business, always respecting her independence, but making it clear he believed in the corner's potential to become something bigger. "I'm still getting used to this renovated space," she replied, looking around with pride. The renovation, initially, financed as a loan from the Sterlings, had been meticulously planned to preserve the place's essence while improving its functionality. Besides, growing too much might mean losing what makes this place special. Raphael nodded in understanding. "Just think about it. No pressure." This was what Victoria appreciated most about the new dynamic between them, the genuine respect for her decisions, the absence of pressure or imposed expectations. Raphael had changed as much as the coffee shop in recent months, finding a balance between his responsibilities to the Sterling family and his own dreams and aspirations. "How was the hospital visit today?" he asked after a moment of comfortable silence. Victoria sighed, placing her cup on the table. "Better than expected. The new treatment seems to be working. The doctors are cautiously optimistic." Marlene's condition had stabilized under the care of the private medical team hired by August. The cancer, though still present, had stopped advancing so rapidly, giving her months, perhaps years, she wouldn't have had without the specialized treatment. "That's wonderful," Raphael said, gently squeezing Victoria's hand. "Your father will be relieved to hear that. He's been very worried, even if he tries not to show it." Father. The word still sounded strange on Victoria's lips. After 30 years of believing she was fatherless, adapting to August's presence in her life was an ongoing process of discovery and adjustment. "Speaking of him," Raphael continued, "he asked me to give you this." He handed her an elegant envelope with the sterling crest. Victoria opened it carefully, finding a formal invitation to the inauguration of the new wing of St. John's Hospital, now named the Marlene Clark Oncology Treatment Center. "He really did it," Victoria murmured, moved. "Mum is going to be... I don't even know how to describe it." "August Sterling always keeps his promises," Raphael replied with a smile. "Especially the ones he makes to the heart." Since the dramatic revelation at the food festival, August had dedicated himself to 2 parallel missions, reconnecting with the daughter he hadn't known for 3 decades and ensuring the best possible treatment for Marlene. The Oncology Center was the culmination of these efforts, a legacy that would help not only Marlene, but thousands of other patients without the resources for advanced treatments. "Did Isabel confirm she's attending?" Victoria asked, referring to the Sterling matriarch who had received the news of an illegitimate daughter with a mix of shock, indignation, and eventually a reluctant acceptance. Raphael hesitated, turning his cup in his hands. "She said she'll be there. For August mostly. But also, well, she mentioned it's time to properly get to know her husband's daughter." Victoria couldn't suppress an ironic smile. "Properly get to know me, after 3 months of analyzing me as if I were some kind of rare specimen?" "You know how she is," Raphael replied with a shrug. "Proud, traditional, used to having control over everything. Discovering not only that her husband had a daughter with another woman, but that this daughter grew up without the privileges of the Sterling name, completely oblivious to the family fortune. It was a shock to her most fundamental values." "And what about Patricia?" The question slipped out before Victoria could stop it. Though she avoided the topic, curiosity about the fate of Raphael's abandoned fiancée often bothered her. "She returned to France 2 weeks ago," Raphael answered, showing no particular emotion. "The agreement between the families was renegotiated. The Moreaus will maintain their business partnership with the Sterlings, but without the marital component." "She must hate me," Victoria commented, recalling the icy glare Patricia had given her on the day of the revelations. "Actually," Raphael smiled, "I think she was secretly relieved. Like me, Patricia grew up under the weight of expectations imposed by others. Our marriage would have been convenient for business, but a personal disaster for us both." The sound of lively voices at the shop's entrance interrupted their conversation. Victoria got up to check, finding Mr. Edward, her oldest and most loyal customer, accompanied by none other than August Sterling. The 2 elderly men were chatting animatedly, like old friends reuniting after a long separation. "Victoria, my daughter!" August exclaimed upon seeing her, his eyes lighting up as they always did when he called her that. "I was hoping to find you here. I've brought an old friend to see your coffee shop." Beside him was a tall man with tanned skin and grey hair, wearing simple but elegant clothes. "This is Kaylin Blackfeather, one of the foremost coffee experts in the country," August introduced proudly. "He coordinates the project for preserving heirloom coffee varietals." Victoria immediately recognized the name. Kaylin Blackfeather was a legend in the coffee world, responsible for rediscovering and preserving ancestral varieties that had nearly disappeared during predatory agricultural expansion. "Your coffee has an extraordinary reputation, Ms. Clark," Kaylin said, extending his hand to greet her. "August speaks wonders of your creations with Brazil nuts and pecans." "Please, call me Victoria," she replied, genuinely honored. "And any compliment from you is an immense honor." "Actually," August intervened, "Kaylin is here for a specific reason. Why don't we sit down and talk?" While Raphael brought more coffee and snacks, the 4 of them settled at the table in the indoor garden. Kaylin took a folder with documents and photos from his briefcase. As you may know, Victoria, for the last 5 years I've been coordinating a project to preserve and promote native coffee varietals grown by indigenous communities in Central and South America, he began. Recently, we've established a network of small producers who cultivate these varieties using traditional methods, respecting the rainforest and generating sustainable income for their communities. That's admirable work, Victoria commented, genuinely interested. I read about it in a trade magazine last year. The next step of the project, Kaylin continued, is to establish partnerships with specialty coffee shops that can introduce these beans to the public, telling their stories, creating experiences that value not just the product, but all the ancestral knowledge behind it. Victoria felt her heart race, beginning to understand where this conversation was heading. We are selecting 10 coffee shops across the United States to be ambassadors for this project, Kaylin explained. Establishments that not only serve quality coffee, but have an ethical, authentic, and committed approach to cultural preservation. He opened a folder, revealing photos of different coffee varieties, maps of indigenous communities, and a document titled Roots of the Americas, Ancestral Coffee Appreciation Program. Victoria's Corner would be perfect as our representative in the Southeast, he concluded, smiling. If you're interested, of course. Victoria looked at Raphael, who was watching the scene with a restrained smile, clearly already aware of the proposal. Then at August, whose eyes shone with paternal pride, an expression that still moved her deeply every time he directed it at her. That would be, she began, struggling to find the right words, an immense honor, but I have to be honest. I'm just a small coffee shop in New Orleans. There are much larger establishments with more infrastructure. That's precisely why you're perfect, Kaylin interrupted gently. We're not looking for the biggest, but the best, those who maintain the essence, who tell stories through coffee, who value the roots. Roots, Victoria repeated, the word resonating in a special way. In recent months, she had discovered her own roots, reconnecting with parts of her history she thought were lost forever. I accept, she finally replied, extending her hand to seal the deal. Victoria's Corner will be proud to represent this project. As they discussed the practical details of the partnership, Victoria noticed the growing crowd at the front of the shop. It was the afternoon rush when tourists and locals mingled in search of a cozy refuge from the Louisiana heat. I need to help up front, she apologized, standing up. Can we continue this conversation after closing? Of course, Kaylin agreed. I'll be in town for a few days. No rush. August also stood. I need to visit Marlene at the hospital. Raphael, are you coming or staying? I'll stay and help, Raphael replied, already familiar with the shop's routine. In recent months, it had become common to see him waiting tables or making coffee during the busiest times, to the astonishment of the local elite who occasionally frequented the place. Before leaving, August approached Victoria, taking her hands in his. I'm proud of you, daughter, he said, his voice thick with emotion, of what you've built, of who you are. Proud not as a sterling, but as a father. Simply as a father. The simplicity and sincerity of the words touched Victoria deeply. Behind the business empire, the traditions and expectations, August Sterling was, in the end, just a man who had found the daughter he thought he had lost. And at that moment, that was all that mattered. As the hours passed and the coffee shop pulsed with the energy of its customers, Victoria moved between the tables with a lightness she hadn't felt in years. Beside her, Raphael worked with the same dedication, occasionally exchanging glances and smiles that said more than words. When the last customer had finally left and the doors were closed, Victoria went up to the small terrace above the shop, her private refuge for moments of reflection. The view of the French Quarter at night was breathtaking, the golden lights dotting the streets, the river in the background reflecting the starry sky, the distant mix of sounds from a city that never completely slept. She felt rather than heard Raphael's presence behind her. In recent months they had developed this silent connection, this ability to communicate without words, that both frightened and fascinated her. Do you want to be alone? He asked, respecting her space as he always did. Victoria turned, extending her hand in a silent invitation. No, not tonight. Raphael moved closer, lacing his fingers with hers. Side by side, they gazed at the city that had brought them together so unexpectedly. "I've thought a lot about what's happened in the last few months," Victoria said finally, "about how our lives have completely changed in such a short time." "For the better, I hope," Raphael replied, his thumb tracing soft circles on her palm. "For the better," she confirmed, smiling, "but also more complicated, more real." "When I found out I wasn't your biological brother," Raphael said after a moment of silence, "I felt a relief so profound it scared me. I realized in that instant how much you already meant to me." Victoria felt her heart race. They had carefully navigated around this topic for weeks, testing boundaries, building trust, but never truly naming what was growing between them. "And when I thought you were my brother," she confessed, her voice almost a whisper, "I felt like the universe was playing a cruel joke, like I had finally found someone who completely understood me, only to discover it was impossible." "Nothing is impossible," Raphael murmured, turning to face her. In the moonlight, his eyes seemed to hold all the mystery of the river that stretched to the horizon. "Just improbable, like us." "Us," Victoria repeated, the word carrying a weight, a promise. "Yes, us," Raphael confirmed, moving slowly closer. "An independent chef who built her own empire from nothing, and a reluctant heir who ran from his own name only to rediscover its value. Improbable but perfect together. When their lips finally met, it was as if all the pieces of a complex puzzle fit together perfectly. There was no urgency, only the quiet certainty that this moment had always been destined to happen, from the very first instant their paths crossed on that stormy night." "And now?" Victoria asked, when they finally parted, their arms still entwined. Raphael smiled, that smile that lit up his entire face and warmed something deep inside her. "Now we live, one day at a time. We build something of our own, something that isn't defined by the sterling name or by others' expectations, just by us, by what we choose to be together." The simplicity and perfection of those words made Victoria smile. For 30 years, she had built walls around her heart, believing that love was a luxury she couldn't afford. Now those walls were crumbling like sand in the wind, not in an abrupt fall, but in a gradual and liberating surrender. On the terrace of Victoria's Corner, under the starry New Orleans sky, two people who had spent their lives searching for their place in the world finally found it, not in a family name, not in an inheritance or tradition, but in each other's arms. And as the city lights shone like silent witnesses, Victoria Clark Sterling understood that love was not, after all, a luxury or a weakness. It was a daily choice, a patient construction, an act of courage that, like her coffee, required dedication, authenticity, and the willingness to embrace the occasional bitterness that made the sweet moments even more precious. It was, quite simply, the purest form of freedom. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the journey of Victoria and Raphael has touched your hearts. To continue experiencing equally captivating stories, we have prepared a special playlist that you can find by clicking the link to your left. If this narrative of discovery, forgiveness, and true love stirred your emotions, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave a like on this video. Every day we bring you unique stories that explore the complexity of life, with real characters and emotions we can all recognize. Share in the comments which moment touched your heart the most in this story of invisible ties that time could not erase. We look forward to reading your thoughts.